Gopirana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopirana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodhanandana Vradhana Ranjana Sodhanandana Vradhana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jai Gurudev Jai Gurudev Gurudev Jai Gurudev Jai Om Vishnupad Brahmansa Parirajikacharya Satarasati Sima Shri Swami Vaisesi Bhakti Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavad-gita Ki Jai Gopamanandi Hari Hari Bol Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Ajnana-timirandasya Giranjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gnamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripadam Aham Vande Sri Guru Dinataranam Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanyeshwaram Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Haribol, Manivedam Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Nice to see you, Prabhu.
Same, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Thank you very much. How are you?
Good, good.
You look good.
So today we're studying Bhagavad-gita, second chapter, text number 60. Do you want me to get started?
Yeah, I think that's fine, Prabhu. And
yeah, people know me. We're the usual suspects. It's our regular group here.
Yes, this is our great Navina Nirada Prabhu, our host, our guest speaker, an amazing Buddhist speaker, and a great, nice devotee since the 80s, joining from a young age, and hailing now from
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Ann Arbor, Michigan. I wasn't sure about that part. And you're there for how long?
I'll be here for a month. I'm working on my book, so I'll be here at the farm for a little while. But there's a whole bunch of things going on in the area, so.
Well, maybe
plenty of fun for the whole family.
Well, maybe if if there's a segue that seems like it makes sense during the class, if you want to say something about the book, or at the end, I'd be interested.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, try.
All right, good to see you all. So we're going to explore text 60 of the second chapter, Bhagavad-gita. Let me find it. So the chapter's titled Contents of the Gita Summarized. Yatato hyapi kaunteya purushasya vipaschitaha indriyani pramatini haranti prasabam manaha. Translation and purport. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination, who is endeavoring to control them. There are many learned sages, philosophers, and transcendentalists who try to conquer the senses. But in spite of their endeavors, even the greatest of them sometimes fall victim to material sense enjoyment due to the agitated mind. Even Vishwamitra, a great sage and perfect yogi, was misled by Menaka into sex enjoyment, although the yogi was endeavoring for sense control with severe types of penance and yoga practice. And of course, there are so many similar instances in the history of the world. Therefore, it is very difficult to control the mind and senses without being fully Krishna conscious. Without engaging the mind in Krishna, one cannot see such material engagements. A practical example is given by Sri Yamunacharya, a great saint and devotee, who says, Yadavadi mamachetta Krishna padaravinda navalavarasa damana dhyantagantamasit Taravadi pattanari sangame smaryamane bhavati mukha vikara sushtunishtivinam cha. Since my mind has been engaged in the service of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, and I've been enjoying an ever new transcendental humor, whenever I think of sex life with a woman, my face at once turns from it, and I spit at the thought. Krishna consciousness is such a transcendently nice thing that automatically material enjoyment becomes distasteful. It is as if a hungry man had satisfied his hunger by a sufficient quantity of nutritious eatables. Maharaj Ambarish also conquered a great yogi, Durvasa Muni, simply because his mind was engaged in Krishna consciousness. Savai Mana Krishna Padaravinda Yoga. Vachansi Vaikuntha Gunanu Varnane. So here in this section of the Gita, Krishna is summarizing the contents of the Gita. He has spoken about the yoga process, somebody who's trying to control their senses and focus them on higher pursuit. And he said in the previous verse, last verse, just as a reminder, as a recap, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense object remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. Now, I'm sure you've all got a little glimpse of experience of that because you're all practicing bhakti yoga. So you have tried to do some fasting, some austerity, something that you gave up, to just notice that that thing came back at you with a stronger vengeance. Have you ever had that kind of experience? Yes. Anyone who has tried to restrict their senses has noticed that the senses come back with a stronger vengeance, with stronger appetite for that engagement. Unless and until we are finding a deeper satisfaction, a higher type of enjoyment, it is very hard to give up the lower activity, so to speak. So in today's verse, Krishna is speaking about the nature of the senses, who are very strong. They're strong and impetuous. Now, sometimes we may underestimate that. We may think, I'm a sane human being. I can manage my senses. Did your senses ever get out of control? Has this ever happened to you? Or is it just me? Like, let's say, to give you an example, you're driving on the highway, it's rush hour, and somebody cuts you off. And you start speaking in sign language, and then you start getting more explicit. Has this ever happened to you, or is it just me? So, or you're just going about your business, and some of your favorite sense gratification appears. It may be food, it may be a car, it may be beautiful member of the opposite sex, it may be some music, anything that captivates one of the senses. And immediately the senses, they zoom in. They totally zoom into that sense object and get completely absorbed in it. So that is the nature of the senses, that even one sense alone has the power, the potency to completely captivate your mind and to drive you to activities that are not only not really meaningful or conducive, but they can be quite harmful and destructive to you. We can see how people are losing their families, their jobs, their careers, their prestige, because they're not in control of their senses. They say something stupid, they do something stupid, and all of a sudden they're in deep trouble. So this not only happens to materialists, this can also happen to people who are on the spiritual path. The example here in the purport is given of Vishwamitra Muni, who was a great Muni. He engaged for thousands of years in sense control. But then a heavenly society girl, Menaka, she showed up, and simply by the tinkling of her ankle bells, the mind of Vishwamitra was disturbed, and he got persuaded, and he fell down from his position of yoga, which shows that it doesn't have to be always the eye. It can be any type of the senses that gets attracted to something. Did you ever get stuck in a warm shower because, it was just a nice shower? I'm just, speaking from personal experience. And time is passing, and you may not even, think anything about it, but you're just oblivious of your surrounding, because when a sense is absorbed in sense enjoyment, all other things go out the window. All other things kind of take a back burner. So there's this verse in the yoga text, Matra swasraduhi prava naivikshasano bhavet balavan indriya gramo vidvansana pikarshati, which means that we should be careful in how we associate, especially the combination of men and women always leads to attraction. Because if you have two magnets, they will always attract each other. Because of the polarities, you have the yin and the yang, and they're always attracting to each other. So in that verse, it is stated that one should be careful even while associating with mother, sister, or daughter. Now, someone may say, why do you have to state that? I mean, who in his right mind would be attracted to his mother or to his sister or to his daughter? But it says specifically, even a person, vidvan, a person of great learning, of great education, he can become enamored and lose his sense control. So when Jaimini, who was a great scholar, heard that verse, he thought, I can't accept that. I mean, how can you as an educated person be attracted to your mother, sister, or daughter, right? I mean, it's just not plausible for an educated man. So he kind of questioned that. But his guru, Vyasadeva, told him that you can't just change scripture. You can't just say, this rule doesn't apply to you because, I'm a PhD or I'm an MA, BA, or I'm a yogi. So Jaimini said, I still find it very hard to believe. Have you heard this story before? No? Okay, I don't want to bore you here on this sunny Saturday afternoon. So Vyasadeva, his guru, said, don't worry, you will see. So in the night, Jaimini was a sage, so he lived in the forest, so he had a little shack. They call it a little house. And in the night, there was a great thunderstorm and a lot of rain. And all of a sudden, Jaimini heard knocking on his door. And he thought, what is this? I'm alone. I'm out in the forest. It's a big storm. No one could be there by all means. So he asked, who is there? And voice of a woman said, it's me. I'm outside here. I'm lost in the wilderness. It's cold and wet outside. Please give me shelter. And Jaimini said, I'm a renunciate. I'm a yogi. I cannot associate with women. So he said, because he was kind-hearted, so he said, you can stay outside on the porch. Just stay on the porch. But then after a while, as he tried to go back to sleep, he thought, that's really impolite, I mean, I'm here in the house, I'm, warm and cozy, and this woman, the stranger, is outside on the porch in the rain, so it's not really gentlemanly. So he said, okay, you can come in. And then the lady said, but I can't be with a man in the same room unless we're married. And by that time, he was already so attracted, he was already so attached to the idea of being with the woman that he has said, okay, all right, I'll marry you. And so she said, but I'll only marry you on the one condition. And he said, no problem, any condition, I'll fulfill it. It's fine, we can do it. I'm a yogi, I got powers. I can, whatever wish you have, my dear beautiful damsel, I will fulfill it. So she said that you have to carry me on your back up the hill. And on your back means you have to walk on your fours, and I'm sitting on your back. And he said, no problem, we'll do it. So next morning came, the sun came up, and he got on his fours, the lady climbed on his back, and he was painfully, slowly crawling up the mountain. And as he reached the top of the mountain, I'm just making the long story short, his hands, his knees, his elbows, everything was a bloody mess. And he thought, okay, now we conquered the mountain. We conquered the heart of this lady. Let's get married. Let's get on with it. And he turned around, and who did he see? His Guru Vyasadeva. So the lady that got down from his back was actually his guru, his teacher, who had transformed himself into this young damsel to prove this point to him, that you may think you're educated, you're learned, you're a yogi, you're sense controlled, but actually, you're still a man. And that means you're still mortal. You still have senses. Those senses still reach out to their sense objects. And you can become captivated to the extent that you lose your mind and you will do things that are harmful, that are foolish, and that are completely destructive. So here in the purport, Prabhupada brings out another example, the one of Yamunacharya, who in his previous life or in his youth had been a king and had ample opportunity for sensual pursuit, but then later on took to devotional service and came to a point of detachment where he would not even entertain the thought of sense gratification or sexual engagements, so much so that he would just push that thought out of his mind. He would spit at that thought. Again, please note that he was not spitting at women. He was not derogatory, but he was just rejecting the idea of sense gratification. Why? Because he had a higher taste, a transcendental taste in his yogic practice. And it is compared to a hungry man who has satisfied their hunger by sufficient quantities of nutritious eatables, and thus is not anymore interested in any type of food or variety. Has it ever happened to you that you had eaten amply and somebody came and offered you something to eat, and no matter what it was, you would just categorically reject the idea? Because when you're full, right? And when you're satisfied, then any extra would mean it's just a botheration. It's just a disturbance, so to speak. So a hungry man that's being satisfied with ample nutritious foodstuffs is not looking for more varieties of food, but is not interested anymore. And then the last example, before I open up for questions and discussion, is Maharaj Ambarish and Durvasa Muni. It's another beautiful story from the Bhagavatam. Maharaj Ambarish was a king. He was a married man, a householder, and he had an invited guest, Durvasa Muni, a great sage. And the great sage came with his students, with many thousands of disciples. So, actually, I don't know if he had disciples with him. He just said that he came. It's a different story. I'm mixing up the stories here. But he came, Durvasa Muni came to Maharaj Ambarish, and Ambarish said, yes, I will have you for lunch. And Durvasa went to do his ablutions, his noon bath and meditation in the river. But then the time for breaking the fast came, and Ambarish had to face the choice of either breaking his fast and probably upsetting his guest, or not breaking the fast and foregoing his ritualistic fast and just waiting till his guest would come and then eat. So he chose, under guidance of his advisors, to drink a little bit of water, because drinking water is considered breaking the fast and not breaking the fast. So if it's a festival day and it's supposed to be a fast day, you can drink water, and it can be considered either way, depending on how strict you are. But Durvasa Muni, because he was a yogi, he could immediately recognize that his host had drunk water, and he became very upset, very offended. He said, "How is this possible? You invite me to your home as your guest to feed me, but then you eat before me. It's very impolite. I'm very disappointed." And he was so mad and angry that he created a big, huge, fiery demon that would devour Maharaj Ambarish. But because Ambarish Maharaj was a pure devotee, he was simply dependent on Krishna's protection. So he did not put up a fight. He just took shelter of Krishna. And Sudarshan Chakra, the chakra, the wheel, the fiery disc weapon of Vishnu, appeared and chased that demon and defeated that demon and chased after Durvasa Muni. And the Muni, the yogi, he traveled all throughout the universe and tried to get shelter in many different abodes, even at Vishnu's abode, but he could not find shelter. Why? Because he had offended the devotee. So Vishnu told him, "I can't give you shelter. Only the person whom you have offended can give you forgiveness." And that is Ambarish. So Durvasa went back down to earth, and he paid his respects and apologized. Ambarish Maharaj had waited for him for a year, and he embraced him, and they made up, and it's a very beautiful encounter. So the point is that sense control does not depend on our physical, intellectual, or mental stamina. But sense control rather depends on our level of satisfaction in our spiritual practice. If we have depth, if we have gravity, and we're satisfied in our spiritual practice, then whatever sensory input will come towards us, it will be like the coming and going of waves. You ever seen the waves come and go, the ocean? It's continuously happening, but it's not really, you notice it, but it's not really upsetting you. It's not attracting or repulsing you. You just accept that this is the way of the world. In a similar way, fame and infamy will come to us, whether we look for it or not. It will come and find you. Have you ever wondered how strange it is that sometimes people will praise you, and sometimes people will insult you or try to put you down? And it's hard to understand why these things happen, right? So we just have to conclude that this is the way of the world. And there's nothing we can do about it except tolerate it and carry on with our spiritual practice. So basically, this is the gist of this verse. Prabhupada makes the concluding points that right in the middle of the purport, it's very difficult to control the mind and senses without being fully Krishna conscious. Without engaging the mind in Krishna, one cannot cease such material engagements. And at the end of the purport, he's mentioning those beautiful verses from the Bhagavatam that glorify Maharaj Ambarish. Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayor Vachansi Vaikunta Gunanuvarnani Karao Hare Mandira Marjanadishu Shrutim Charaka Trityada Satkatvodaya Mukunda Lingala Darshane Drisha, and so on and so on. It is explained that Maharaj Ambarish was using all his senses in devotional service. He would clean the temple of the Lord. He would embrace devotees. he would cook, he would worship the deity, he would chant and hear the holy name. Basically, all his sensory activities were focused on devotional service. And that's why nothing could make him trip. Nothing could make him sway from his resolve to engage in Krishna service. Even though as a king, he had ample opportunity for sensual pursuit, but he was detached. Why? Because he experienced a higher taste in Krishna consciousness. So in a similar way, if we keep ourselves busy in bhakti and we focus ourselves on our higher goals, then different types of forms of enticement and attractions or repulsions won't be able to make us trip on a sensual or emotional level. So I'd like to open up for questions and comments. Does any of this resonate with you, or am I talking Chinese here? If you want to speak up, you have to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I just see lips moving. I think Susan wants to speak. So can you unmute yourself? I can't hear you, Susan.
So the problem is sense control. The more we control our senses, the more likely we are to have a reaction. The more we control our senses, the more likely we are to have a reaction, a negative reaction. And it's only establishing oneself in Krishna consciousness that can really work that out.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I mean, I just because I'm my computer went down, so you know. So that's control of senses is not a good idea.
Well, it's not a bad idea either. meaning sometimes we try to do something and then it backfires, and then we think like, oh, this is a bad thing, you know. But actually, it's not a bad thing. We may just be going about it in the wrong way. In other words, if we're trying to block something, we're trying to stop our senses from acting. That may be a very unproductive and frustrating experience. But the yoga process rather encourages us to use our sensory capacity in devotional service in a positive way. In other words, trying to stop acting is a really difficult thing. You ever told a child not to do anything? Sit down and shut up. I mean, how long does that work? It doesn't work for very long, right? In a similar way, you tell an adult, don't be active, don't be productive. It will be exceedingly difficult for the person to do that. But rather to use our energy in positive pursuit. And that naturally will achieve sense control. Sense control doesn't mean that you negate your senses, that you stop your senses from acting. No, sense control means that you're not doing activities that are harmful to yourself. Just like, for instance, talking of sense control, a person can get married and can be satisfied with one spouse, and in this way, they can regulate their sensory capacity. And in the yoga text, it is stated that such a person is good as a celibate monk. Now, that might sound shocking to a newcomer, but actually it's a fact. Because to think that now I have ample opportunity for sense enjoyment is I have my license, I can legitimize any type of activity, is a wrong understanding. And it doesn't work in practice also. Anybody who is married or who had that type of experience knows that one has to become regulated. One has to become sense controlled. Otherwise, it's not possible to sustain a relationship. So the bhakti process is so powerful that it accepts persons who are married. Whereas in any of the other meditative and yogic processes, complete celibacy is a requirement, which basically rules out 99.999% of the audience. So all the people who are talking about, yoga, meditation, Buddhism, this, that, and the other thing, you can ask them one simple question: Are you celibate? Are you sober? Are you completely? And most likely, very few people can even entertain that thought of just staying completely aloof. Yet again, the bhakti approach is different. It is to engage one's activities, understanding that this is Krishna. This is Krishna's energy. It's Krishna's potency. Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita, Dharma viruddha bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava. That sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, I am that sex life. That's a pretty strong statement, right? Would you agree? Krishna is saying that that's none different from me. To have a family and raise God-conscious children is an act of service, is an act of bhakti, including the act of begetting those children. So it's important that we discuss this and we understand this, because otherwise one gets an incomplete understanding of the bhakti process. And then it's easily seen that people will either get into double standards, hypocrisy, or they may just not be able to apply themselves to the practice at all. There's a lot of people who give up spiritual practice because their understanding is very immature. They think that to be a devotee means I have to give up everything. I have to give up my job. I have to give up my bank account. I have to give up my family. I have to give up all my interests. I mean, there's a stage in life where you try all that, right? It's usually called dropping out. Right? You put everything on the curb and you say, I'm done. I signed off from the world, right? And then later on, you realize that I don't have anything to renounce because nothing belongs to me, actually. These are all facilities. These are all things that have been given by Krishna. So why do I not use them for him, for his service, for his pleasure? This whole idea of I'm the owner and enjoyer, and it is mine to give up, is a faulty understanding. In a similar way, if we try to fight against our own senses, it's a fight that you can't win. Why? Can somebody explain why it's a fight that you can't win?
I think it's frustrating.
Can't hear you. It's very foggy. It's very like your picture.
Yeah, I know. This is the way I get it. This is the way I can have it. I think giving up the senses is really frustrating, and it makes up for anger and because you're not going to succeed by an act of will.
You're not going to what? I couldn't hear you. It's very faint.
People do not succeed by an act of will. They have to be willing, but they don't succeed by an act of will. They succeed by an act of grace.
Correct. Very good point. We don't succeed by an act of will, but by an act of grace. That's beautifully put. Thank you for that, Susan. Our willpower can neither negate our senses nor the ways of the world. But it is only by the grace of God that we can actually progress. Unless we recognize that, and we also recognize that our own very own senses are actually instruments that are being given to us by God. So we will always be in a faulty understanding or perception that I am the controller, I am the Lord of all I survey, and if I choose to be renounced, I will be renounced. And if I choose to be indulgent, I will be indulgent. But again, that is an incomplete understanding, and it's got its limitations. There's a funny story, I don't know if I told it before, of the Christian monk who went to a monastery and he was prescribed. Did I tell that one before? Did you hear that one, Atma?
Say again.
There was a Christian monk and he traveled, so he went to another monastery, and so they engaged him in service as a scribe to copy books. And so he said, well, what are you copying? And they said, well, we're copying from this. And they said, well, but that's not the original, that's a copy. I don't want to copy from a copy from a copy. I want to see the original. And they said, well, the original is way, way, way down in the cave, you know? So he said, okay, I want to go there. And so he went into the cave and he checked the archive. And then they heard this big, huge, euphoric cry from the dungeon, from the archive. And he came up and he was screaming and with tears in his eyes, he was saying, you should celebrate. It says you should celebrate. And in his copy of a copy of a copy, it said you should be celibate, you know? But actually it meant you should celebrate, not you should be celibate. So it's a joke just to prove that little errors of communication can make quite a change in theology. As we have seen, that instead of being inclusive and being supportive of families and of a harmonious life, that many traditions have gone very much to the extreme, have become fanatics, have become very extremely driven either towards renunciation or towards indulgence. But that balance is very rarely seen, where the full spectrum is given. And in the yogic process, in the Vedic process, it's a gradual process of student life, married life, detached life, and renounced life, which is very scientific, and it actually works because that's the stages that every person goes through in life. Thank you, Susan. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have another. What do you do that you somebody crossed you in traffic and you really lose it? What do you do? And I don't mean that somebody crossing you is really very minor, but what do you do if you lose it?
What do you do if you lose it? Yeah, I mean, before you lose it, because it's a common scenario. It's a common scenario that we come into such kind of situations. So it's good to be prepared and to already know how you're going to react. I mean, you have options A, B, C, D, right? You can A, take out your shotgun and just, or option B, you can enter into a race and try to, bypass him and cut him off and stop him and challenge that person. Or you can, call 911 and start complaining about this fellow. Or most likely the best thing is you can think that this person might really be in a hurry. Probably they're late for an appointment or they need to go and pick up their kids. But I'm okay. I'm fine. So let them have way, let them pass. And I'm okay. I'll get there in due time. And my life is fine. It's not really an issue. Because how many times have we arrived early, but it didn't really help us to get ahead in the game? You know? I remember I was up in Vermont and I missed an exit. And it meant that I had to drive for 20 minutes. It took 20 minutes till the next exit came on the highway. And then I had to turn around and drive back 20 minutes. So it took me exactly 45 minutes. And when I reached my destination, my host just pulled into the driveway as I came close to the house, which means that I would have just had to wait for 45 minutes in my car because the person wasn't home. So it's really not about efficiency, but more about what is it that I'm trying to do? What is it that I'm trying to achieve in life? It helps me personally if I just start chanting, because I know that the mind is a weird creature and it can get very obsessed, very possessed by certain ideas. Have you ever had that you want things a certain way? And oftentimes the world just doesn't commute. It just doesn't correspond to our expectations. And then it's a good practice to just start chanting. In this way, we can disengage. We can take a step back or a couple of steps back and just look at it a little more objectively, that my life is all right. I'm blessed. I'm grateful for what I have. And if I would engage, then most likely it get very messy. I would become implicated in this situation. There's a lot of road rage, a lot of maniacs, and a lot of opportunity for the modes of material nature to take influence over us. So wherever that might be, it might be in traffic, it might be in your kitchen, it might be in the workplace, it might be in your bedroom. We have to know where are these situations where we can get tempted, where we can easily be influenced, and be prepared, be Krishna conscious, be fortified with trained intelligence. Any other tips or suggestions from our audience? Yes, Al.
Well, not a tip or a suggestion, but a question. That's okay. So I like to read verses that are almost right after this one, and then that will be this. Then I'll ask a question about it, about the verse, which is related to what you've been speaking about. Okay, so it's verses 62 and 63 of this chapter. So
Can you read them?
Yeah, I can read it. While contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. Now, the next verse, and that's the one I'm going to ask my question about. From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. Okay, so my question, I think, is about, it says from anger, delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. So I'm wondering if you can describe a little how that works and what that means. From anger.
Oh yeah, I have first-hand experience of that. Thank you for setting me up here. Yeah, when I get attached to something, then most likely it doesn't happen or I don't get it. It's a common scenario. And then when it doesn't happen, then some moha, it's not just illusion, but it's perfect illusion, which means delusion. It becomes such a big illusion that I'm completely captivated. I'm completely mesmerized. I'm completely overwhelmed by it, to that extent that my memory, my remembrance, my faculties become impaired. I lose track of what's actually going on. Have you ever misplaced something and you really thought somebody else took it? To the extent that you already construed the whole scenario of how they took it, why they took it, what they did with it, etc., etc. And you already went down that rabbit hole to just find out that you misplaced it and you put it somewhere else. I mean, has this ever happened to you, or is it just me? You know, you start going off on that mental train to nowhere land, you know, only to find out that it's just completely delusional. So that's what happens. That's the chain of thought that's being displayed here. So then when that good memory is gone, then no more intelligence. One does not have the capacity to actually think and to judge the situation, because one is so absorbed, so involved, so convinced and obsessed by it. And then one again falls completely into the mature pool, which means that the modes take over, depending on which mode we're in. Passion, ignorance, most likely, maybe a little goodness. One starts to blame, accuse, attack, or come up with, you know, new philosophies to justify. So that's the scenario that's being addressed here.
And when people come up with the new philosophies to justify it, like to me, when I see people come up with like ridiculous philosophies that seem to really just an excuse to justify their behavior, to me, I wonder, like, do they really think this, or is this their deceptive way of trying to persuade someone? And sometimes I think maybe they actually believe it, and I can't relate to that.
Oh yeah, they definitely most likely believe it, because that's what delusion does. Delusion does not allow you to take a step back and to look at yourself and at the scenario objectively. But you truly believe it, you know? Like when these people are campaigning out there for whatever it is that they're campaigning, they're not just doing it to make a buck. They actually believe it. They actually think that I'm right, everyone is wrong, they don't get it, I'm trying to save the world here, and people are just not getting it, you know.
Okay, and so what about when this happens, right? I mean, there's devotees that some of us know of who were like high quality devotees in their, or in other words, they were engaged in high quality service. They demonstrated very nice devotional qualities, and then later on, we understood them to be engaged in behavior just like a karmi, you know, materialist, and then they had some strange philosophy too to back it up. So can you explain that one?
Yeah, because that's how Maya operates. As soon as we become affected by the modes, then the modes start taking over, and whatever our situation might be, then our mindset, our philosophy, our reasoning will adapt to whatever situation we're in. Because to us, it becomes normal. It just becomes the norm. So we'll just we'll just create our worldview that's conducive to our current state of life. That's just the normal scenario. Now, from a Vedic or from a Krishna conscious point of view, it's not acceptable. That's substandard. But that's the survival mechanism that's built into the living entity that we just justify our own Maya, so to speak, because that's what seemingly gets us through. That's what seemingly makes us survive in this world. And people don't like to be confronted. They don't like to be called out. They don't like to be challenged. That's why it's most likely not very productive to argue and to debate or to counter them. But I've seen personally, especially with devotees, because they've heard so much philosophy and they have experienced so much in their own life. It works much better to just befriend them and show them kindness and appreciation. And Krishna, in the heart of hearts, is doing his job. It's just like, let's say, for instance, husband and wife. You're married. Most of us have had ample experience of this. The male psychology and the female psychology is different. So if they are both competing for control and for supremacy, then it's a constant fight. It's a constant battle. But if we understand that the psychologies work differently and we take note of that and we accommodate the difference in psychology, then it can actually be conducive. Why am I bringing up this example? Because oftentimes the acknowledgement, the rectification, and the transformation happens not in a confrontation or in a debate or in an argument, but it happens when the environment is supportive and the person feels confident and confident enough to actually change themselves, to improve themselves. In other words, if I don't feel that I'm going to be accepted or appreciated when I first of all admit my weaknesses, if I don't feel comfortable and confident when I change myself because some other people will feel alienated or disturbed by that, then why would I change my ways? Why would I change anything in my outlook, so to speak? So to create an environment where people are seeing that they be supported and loved and cared for, irregardless of how much or how little they contribute or whatever their standard might be, it will help people to better themselves, to better their ways, so to speak. I don't know if you get the point I'm trying to get across here. Sometimes we just want to enforce the law and just say, this is it, and everybody has to comply. And then we're a little disappointed that most people don't show up for the compliance check. Or in the words of Jim Morrison, good old Bhakta Jim, who said, I canceled my subscription to Resurrection. If you get what I'm talking about, So.
Yeah. And what about, Prabhu, what about, so some people, they completely lose it, as you described, right?
Yes.
And other people who are devotees, when they lose something, but they always keep on going with their devotional service, like maybe 50%, even only at 25%, but they're still like Haribol to the devotees, and there's at least some Haribols that's being heard inside their house, So So why is it that some devotees, they get like that, and then these other devotees who were, they could have been, very inspiring person amongst devotees, say a decade or two earlier, and then their mindset is like how you were describing it, where they completely checked out, and now they have a new ethos, a new philosophy to explain what they're doing.
Different reasons why that can happen. Sometimes it's offenses, that they became offensive, they became hostile to other devotees. And so Krishna just said, you know what, you take a break now. Maybe you have to take a break for this lifetime. Maybe they're not able to face up to their own, situation. And it's better that they just be somewhere else doing something else rather than create more harmful activities, so to speak. So, but it's a big topic, it's a big theme. I've seen people who have been away for years, sometimes for decades, and in their final stretch, they still come through. Krishna still does the magic, and usually by the mercy of a devotee, things improve drastically. But even if that would not be the case, Krishna says, whatever devotional credits you accrue, they will never be lost. They won't be lost to you. We may forget that we have credits, but the credits are always there. Now, you may not be able to avail yourself immediately of those credits, but we know sooner or later that person will take up the practice again. Now, you mentioned sometimes people, they just go a little distant, but they keep on practicing. That is a common scenario, that people fluctuate. They're not always in the same drive, in the same full-on mode. So it also has to do with the stages of life that people go through. Like sometimes people think, oh, if you're married, you have a job, you have a family, that means you're gone, like you're off, you're in Maya, you can't possibly be a pure devotee. But we see that most of our Vaishnavacharyas were married and had families and very involved in the world and were very functional in the world. But still they kept their devotional practice going. But they may or may not have had any institutional involvement. For the most part, in Vaishnava society, institutions were not really dominant. That's a very recent thing. Before that, it was really more individual practice, so to speak. So sometimes we put too much emphasis on pledging allegiance to the flag and kissing the ring of the Pope and, like protocol, going through the externals, so to speak. It's very hard, if not impossible, to actually judge the heart and the character of someone, unless we know them closely and we can actually observe what are their devotional practices, what are their views. Like I've had the privilege of visiting many, many senior devotees, also people who have been somewhat away from the institution, but I've been surprised at how their core beliefs, their fundamental values have not changed, even though they may not be visibly active in the mission, but they have a very clear sense of north, so to speak. And I really appreciate that, because it's really something that's reassuring and encouraging. I'm not telling, go that route. I'm just saying, even if it would happen that we get a little carried away by whatever may happen in our lives, it can happen because it's the way of the world, and the modes are very powerful. That Krishna is there, and he has his way of bringing us closer to him. I don't know if this helps.
Yeah, that was very, very, very interesting. Yeah.
So I try not to be judgmental and not to be like too critical with such devotees, because, you know, who am I? Everybody has to fly their own plane. Everyone is struggling on their own level, from Brahma down to the end. You know? Everyone is having their own challenges in this world of names. So it's not my task. I was speaking with Ridananda Maharaj down in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was bringing up a couple of points, a couple of critical situations and incidents and things. And at one point he started laughing and he looked at me and he said, Navina, who appointed you as Yamaraj? like who told you to make this your business? You know, he didn't say this stuff doesn't happen, or this didn't happen, or, you know, this doesn't exist. He just said, you know, what is it to you? Why do we take so much interest? So in closing, to see really like, how did Prabhupada deal with this? How did he deal with fall down? How did he deal with deviation? You know, like sensual or philosophical or institutional transgressions is quite interesting. It's quite interesting to see how Prabhupada, and I'm not going to get into all the details because it's not really the topic of today's discussion, but I just bring it up. So, because sometimes I take, the risk is that I take my own value structure, my own sense of judgment, and I impose it on others, on the world, on the movement, and it doesn't do justice. It doesn't really fly, so to speak. Because again, I am a conditioned soul that's got 4 primary defects and many others. So it's always better to stay respectful and appreciative and give people the benefit of the doubt. But if it's seen that this person may not be really conducive for our spiritual life, we may choose to just keep a respectful distance and not intimately associate with them. That is permissible. And that can be senior devotees, that can be even sometimes someone's authority or spiritual master. If people have difficulty, they may need some time and some space in order to work on themselves. And that can happen. We have seen that in the Bhagavatam. I mean, Brahma, he lost it in the creation. He got completely absorbed in this mode of passion of creating all these life forms and doing all this. And he lost it a few times, you know? He lost it with Krishna. He lost it with his own daughter. He did a few things that were not like really that great. But those who jumped in and tried to get on his case, they all got severe reactions. For the majority, they just stayed off and they just pointed out, you know, that this may not be so great, but we're not going to follow that example. And then Brahma, he understood and he changed his ways, and he's still our Brahma. They didn't kick him out, you know, they didn't demote him or something. He's still running the show, so to speak. Which shows to us that, I mean, he's our Sampradaya. You know, he's like, we're in the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. He's the dude. So, and not to justify, but just to show that Krishna is using his own devotees to show us that people can make mistakes and they can better their ways and improve. So I just found that is very encouraging, so to speak. Because sometimes we have this idea of like, you know, like 1 strike and you're out, or 3 strikes and you're out. Okay, no more. We don't want to see this person anymore. You know, like he's in the doghouse. But who are we to say? Who are we to say?
Do you think
Any other?
Wait, one more. Can I do one more?
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
So on that last, I definitely appreciate, and I agree with everything you're saying actually, but still I wanted to look at that last point from the other side, which is, well, one strike, two strikes, three strikes, and you're still at bat. What's going on here? And then, so on the other hand, some devotees might get upset because they're thinking, hey, it seems like some people think that, you do something wrong, and if we like you, we're just going to let you keep on trying and doing it, and you're never going to be demoted.
Yeah.
It
So
seems like
on an institutional platform, there has to be justice, but there also has to be due process. And oftentimes we forget that. People are very hot about justice, but they forget about due process, that there's a way of how to do things right. And so an institution has to take a stand. But on an individual platform, as I mentioned, what I said earlier, that's how we should respond on an individual platform. But from an institutional position, there has to be some stand, especially if it's leaders or people in a position of authority. But again, it's a matter of how this is being dealt with and how it's being communicated, so that it will actually be beneficial for the individuals concerned, not just, we serve justice, but what was the cost of that justice? So to speak. So that means really we have to come to a higher level of understanding, be in a Vaishnava consciousness, and that's why we have to have Brahmins, we have to have people who are sober, not just understanding the letter of the law, but also understanding the spirit of the law. Like, what's the intent? What is it meant to actually achieve? Then it can be conducive. But yes, an institution has to take a stand, and that might not be always very palatable. It might not be always very, very pleasing, so to speak, for the individual or for the public. But that's what institutions have to do. Like government has to take a stand. They can't just say, oh yeah, it's a bunch of nice guys, let them do whatever they want. They have to put down their foot and make a stand. Other topics or questions or reflections? And it's interesting to note how different people in the Varnashram system have different value structures, because the Shudras are governed by sense gratification, the Vaishyas by capitalism, by gain, the Kshatriyas by law and order, and the Brahmins by scripture, and they're self-governed because they subscribe to Krishna's laws naturally. So that's why when we get into the field of law and justice and how to apply law and justice, one also has to see that it might not necessarily be the same rules that apply to everybody. Which may sound a little confusing for a modern mind, so to speak. Just like if a Shudra can regulate himself and do his whatever it is that he's doing, then it's a great thing, He may say, okay, I only get drunk once a month or once a week. But for him, that might be a great achievement. But if a Brahmin says that, that's unacceptable. It's completely not acceptable, so to speak. So if people are in a position of authority, then much more is expected of them, so to speak. I don't know if that makes sense. Again, the topic is sense control, that the senses are impetuous and strong. Krishna tells Arjuna, yes, you can control the mind that is having godlike powers, that is usually harder to control than a wind. You can do it, abhyasena varagyena, through constant practice and through detachment, which comes from philosophical understanding. So if we have a regulated sadhana where daily we absorb ourselves in study of scriptures and chanting Hare Krishna and devotional service, and we cultivate spiritual knowledge, then we can cultivate that sense of detachment by engaging all our senses, all our faculties, in the service of the master of the senses. Vishavinivartante niraharasya dehina aso yasya Vishavinivartante niraharasya dehina raso varjam rasopyasya param drishva nivartate. That's it. By engaging the senses in the service of the master of the senses, we can control them because we have achieved that higher taste, that higher level of satisfaction in Krishna consciousness. That is, in a nutshell, the conclusion. Any concluding comments or questions? Okay, we'll have a little more kirtan, if that's all right.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. There's just one story that I wanted to tell before I sign off. You asked me about my book, so I'm working on a book on outreach, on Sankirtan. That's going to be published by the BBT. So right now I'm just revising and rewriting and editing different sections of the book. So that's what's happening at the moment. And I'm here in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. We had a big art fair here, which is one of the biggest in the country, with tens of thousands of visitors and hundreds of artists who are selling paintings and sculptures and handicrafts. So I went booth to booth and I approached all the artists, because to me that's much more exciting than just dealing with the public. I want to go to the influencers, to the people who have impact on others. And many were very, very receptive and appreciative that I brought in these books. It's for all the conscious artists. I know you worked hard for this exhibition, and you can influence people's opinion and minds. So I want you to have these books. And people were very, very open. I had one lady from Lithuania who told me that when she was a young girl in her teens, she had many existential questions about her identity and the nature of the world, and that the Bhagavad-gita answered all her queries, all her questions. But then when she was 16, her family migrated to the United States, and she had to leave everything behind. Her books, her art, her friends, her whole life. And now 35 years later, the same Bhagavad Gita shows up, and she gets the same book. And she got very emotional. She was very appreciative, very open. She took a whole set of books. So it was very nice. Many people already knew our books and were looking for more. So yeah, that's just one little anecdote. I'm right now going through the process after I wrote the book like 6-7 months ago. And now I have to again put my writing cap on and get into writing mode, which is quite different from just getting stuff done in the world of names. It requires a certain sense of sobriety, of diligence. And actually it's good because writing helps us to refine our thought process. So if you have the chance, do keep a journal or write down your realizations and try to combine it with your spiritual practice. And I have seen personally, it helped me to gain more clarity and more resolve in my devotional life, so to speak. And I've also realized that not everything that I put to paper is fit for public consumption. And that I have to be a little detached, especially when you face the editors who are different species of people who they have their, because some things you can say them, but you can't really write them. Many things we say in a classroom or in a talk, and it's very, very much acceptable, but you can't put it on paper because it just won't fly. It will be misunderstood, it will be misconstrued, and it can be counterproductive sometimes. Not just in terms of liability, but also we may just not be heard. We may not get our point across. So it helps me to gain more understanding and to refine my voice, so to speak. So it's been a sobering process. And I'm grateful for this opportunity, but it will take a while for the finished product to see the light of the day. And right now, I'm not yet there where I have like a release date because right now also the whole idea of marketing is kind of on hold. So it will be some time before it will actually happen.
So who is it? Who is the intended audience, and what's the book's title?
The book's name is Sankirtan Amrita, the Nectar of Sri Krishna Sankirtan, and the audience is anybody who wants to make a difference in the world. Yeah.
But I mean, are you focusing more on the devotees and less?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because the BBT publishes it, so it's more internal publication. But still, I've been asked to present it in such a way that it's not just a sales manual, but that it's actually more principles that are relevant for not just the insiders, but for anybody who would be interested in how to make a difference. I wanted also, part of it is autobiographical because there's a lot of anecdotes and personal experiences, but also like to show the story of what happened to a 15-year-old kid who got a Bhagavad-gita in his high school, and how to start spiritual communities and sustain them through the Sankirtan process. In other words, if somebody were to find this book in a remote area, in a remote corner of the world, they could actually start the whole Sankirtan movement by themselves, just by reading this book. So that's kind of my meditation, because I can see that the movement is kind of going cyclical, and in some places it's underground, and in some places it's very much gaining ground, and in other places it's plateaued, and in other places it's declining. So I get to see more and more that Krishna has a plan, and that he executes his plan through those persons who are willing to collaborate, to cooperate with him in that plan. And so it's not that you can put a fixed timeline or a geographical specification on it. So that's my little bit of experience in a nutshell.
It sounds great. So is the focus more on Sankirtan book distribution, or on like all kinds of preaching? I assume at least there's an emphasis on book distribution, but
There's an emphasis on book distribution.
But is it almost entirely that, or just an emphasis?
No, just an emphasis. Mm-hmm. But it will combine all the different angas and practices of Sankirtan, the complete chanting, from cultivation to follow up to building communities, and the whole 9 yards, so to speak.
Oh, and how many pages is it?
Oh, that's way too early to tell.
Well, like, is it going to be like, between 75 and 150 pages, or is it going to be between 250 and 400? How about that?
More 250 to 400.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So something fairly substantial. But then again, you never know, because the editors, they tend to chop more, and so we'll have to see.
But you already met them. They already began to do the chopping, right?
Right now we're more looking at sections that need rewrites, and I'm yet to get the full, feedback. But I know it's been accepted by the review board, which is I'm good.
That's a pretty good.
Otherwise, I could just name it, Novinsky's Underground Manifesto for the revolution, and then you can just put out whatever you want. Mm-hmm. So it's good to go with BBT or with a publisher that that will get the job done, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Because publishing is a specific art, it's a trade. And yeah, it's interesting. It's also good to become more detached from one's own writing, because you see that there's many different ways how you can say things and how you can present things, and to be open to that and to become more sensitive to one's own voice and the way we're being perceived. Like, I'm tall and I'm quite direct, as some of you may have noticed. So sometimes people may tell you, hey, whoa, step back. Like, cool it down a notch. So in a similar way, when you write things, that the way we go about it has there's different ways. So I'm learning all that may have been just common knowledge for most of you who went to university, who did their college, engaged maybe writing extensively. But I never had that luxury. So it's kind of interesting to me to see how language affects us, and gives me great appreciation for Prabhupada, who stayed up every night and not just translated 6 pages, but really deeply meditated and thought on how to present this message in a way that people will be able to not only understand it, but appreciate it and apply themselves to it, so they felt encouraged. So he wasn't like, okay, this is how it is, like it or leave it. But that people felt like, hey, I can do this, you know, I want to do this. And that's really a gift. That's really an art. Not to, it's easy to be quick on the draw and to kind of overshoot the target, but it may just scare off a lot of people. So Prabhupada had this unique art of being conservative, traditional, non-compromising, at the same time very compassionate, considerate, and encouraging. It's kind of a very unique combination of qualities. And that really means maturity. That really means Krishna consciousness. So to me, that's the ideal, and that's what I'm aspiring for. So thank you for the time and your attention to be with you. And I wish you a great weekend. Hare Krishna. All goes to Prabhupada. Thank you, Atma.
Hare Krishna. If devotees want to join me expressing appreciation to Navina Nirada Prabhu, this is the time. Navina Nirada Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Brenda ki jai.
Yeah.